That Saturday possessed a distinct, unhurried quality. A day where time seemed to stretch and soften at the edges. I was lounging in my apartment, the city's hum a distant backdrop, aimlessly scrolling through my phone when a notification blinked. It was a missed call from a number I knew well. Isabel Vance, my former client. She'd left a message, her voice calm and clear, asking if I could possibly drop by with the final, signed copies of the settlement agreement. The case was officially, irrevocably closed. It hardly felt like an imposition. I gathered the thick document folder from my briefcase and sent her a quick text letting her know I was on my way. Isabel's condo was in a sleek high-rise overlooking Millennium Park, a short drive from my own place in the South Loop. Nothing complicated. Throughout the grueling 18 months of litigation, I'd only ever met with her in my office or the courthouse. I knew her son, Ethan, was typically around, a quiet college kid who'd occasionally sit in on meetings, but he mostly faded into the background. I hadn't given her personal life much thought beyond the grim details of her case. She was an attractive woman, certainly, probably in her early 40s, but carrying an elegance that made age irrelevant. To me, she had always been Isabel Vance, the plaintiff, my client. That was the beginning and end of it? Nothing more. So when I pressed the buzzer and was buzzed up to her floor, I expected to be greeted by the same composed, professionally dressed woman I'd spent countless hours with in depositions. Instead, when the door swung open, it was her, but not her. She was clad only in a thick white towel, her blonde hair damp and clinging to her neck from a recent shower. She looked momentarily surprised, but not embarrassed. My eyes darted away almost immediately, finding a sudden, intense interest in the abstract art on her hallway wall. The air thickened with an unspoken awkwardness. "Hey, Marcus," she said, a small, genuine smile playing on her lips. "Ethan went out for a bit. What brings you by?" I fumbled my words for a second, my professional composure deserting me, before holding up the leather-bound folder like a shield. "Just dropping these off. The final copies. I had no idea you'd be in the middle of something." She let out a soft laugh, a sound far more relaxed than any I'd heard from her before, and tucked a wet strand of hair behind her ear. "Oh, I'm not busy," she replied, her tone breezy. "Just got out of the shower. Do you want to come in for a minute?" I hesitated, a flicker of professional caution warring with simple curiosity, but I stepped inside anyway. She wasn't a stranger, not by a long shot, but this felt entirely different. I had only ever seen her as a resilient, focused figure, a victim fighting for justice. I never imagined feeling this disarming sense of attraction toward her. We settled in her expansive living room, the panoramic windows framing the Chicago skyline, and she handed me a glass of sparkling water. At first our conversation was light, centered on the relief of the case being over. But as we talked, I noticed she was opening up in a way that was entirely new. She spoke about her life, how the lawsuit had consumed every waking moment for years, and now, in the quiet aftermath, she felt strangely adrift. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was speaking with a client. It was just her and me, two people sharing a moment of unguarded honesty. And the way she looked at me, with an intensity that had nothing to do with legal strategy, suggested she was interested in what I had to say. Not as her lawyer, but as a person. That was when something shifted inside me. I began to see her differently. There was a whole universe to her beyond being Isabel Vance, the case file. Then she offered a soft, almost enigmatic smile. "Marcus, you've been incredible through all of this," she said. "It's strange to think we won't be having our weekly strategy calls anymore." I didn't know quite how to respond, so I just gave a slight nod. A new kind of energy was crackling between us, something unsaid but undeniably there. I could feel it, a low hum of tension, a quiet spark, but I wasn't sure what it meant. I only knew that I wasn't ready to leave just yet. She stood and moved toward the kitchen, and I found myself following. As she passed, I caught the fresh, clean scent of her soap. And for a fleeting moment, she was no longer my client. She was simply a woman, an individual with her own story and her own needs. "Thank you for bringing these by," she said, turning to face me, the folder now resting on her marble countertop. I think I needed to talk to someone today who wasn't part of my old life." I offered her a small smile, a warmth spreading through my chest. "Anytime," I said, and as I finally took my leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that a fundamental change had occurred between us. Something unspoken had been planted, and I had no idea where it would lead. The next time I saw Isabel, it was completely by chance. I was at a bookstore downtown a few days later, looking for a gift, when I saw her in the history aisle. She was holding a thick hardcover, studying the back cover with a slight, thoughtful frown. For some reason, that simple image struck me. How had I never noticed the natural grace in her posture, the intelligence that radiated from her, even in a moment of quiet contemplation? It wasn't just her physical appearance, it was the way she moved, the subtle confidence she exuded. I hadn't expected to run into her, and honestly I was unsure how to act. We hadn't spoken since that strange, charged morning with the towel and the legal documents, but something about that day had stayed with me. Something about her smile and the directness of her gaze lingered in my mind. I'd tried to dismiss it as a one-time anomaly, a brief crossing of wires now that our professional relationship was over. But then she looked up, and her eyes met mine. "Marcus," she said, her voice a low murmur, her smile slow and welcoming. It was the kind of voice that instantly put you at ease. I smiled back, trying to keep my own tone casual. "Hello, Isabel. I didn't expect to see you here." She explained she was just killing some time before meeting a friend, gesturing vaguely with the book. "What about you?" A simple question, but it bloomed into a full conversation. We talked about books, about Chicago, about the relief of moving on to new chapters. But beneath the surface-level chat, I could feel that same thrum of something deeper. There was a quiet, palpable tension in the small glances and shared smiles. Then, out of the blue, she asked, "Are you doing anything tonight?" She said it nonchalantly, as if the answer didn't matter, but I could sense she was testing the waters. I wasn't sure how to respond. I shrugged, affecting an ease I didn't feel. "Not much. Just a quiet night at home." She smiled faintly. "Ethan's out with friends for the evening. I was thinking of making dinner to celebrate the end of, well, everything. You should come over. It would be nice to have some company." The offer caught me completely off guard. My professional instinct screamed at me to politely decline. After all, besides the case, what did we really have to talk about? But the sincerity in her invitation made it difficult to refuse. Before I could overthink it, I heard myself saying, "Yeah, sure, I'd like that." And that was it. I had no idea what I was walking into. But later that evening, as I drove back to her building, my stomach was tight with a nervous energy. There was a buzz in my chest I couldn't quite name, a feeling that I was about to step across a threshold I hadn't even known was there. When I arrived, her home felt different. The scent of roasted garlic and herbs filled the air, wrapping the space in a warmth that felt almost too inviting. Isabel was in the kitchen, humming softly to herself as she stirred something on the stove. I stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching her. And that's when it hit me. The woman before me didn't feel like the Isabel Vance I had represented. She looked the same, but something about her was more authentic, more open. "Come on in. Make yourself comfortable," she said over her shoulder. "Dinner's almost ready." I took a seat at her kitchen island, trying not to look as uncertain as I felt. She moved around the kitchen with an effortless grace, completely at home. Meanwhile, I sat there trying to decipher the strange mix of feelings churning inside me. It wasn't just her appearance or how relaxed she seemed. It was the way she was making me feel, as if I were more than just her former lawyer, more than a witness to a painful chapter of her life. We ate, and the conversation flowed easily. There were no awkward pauses or forced pleasantries. We talked about life, about how things rarely go according to plan. She spoke of her years before the lawsuit, of a life filled with travel and spontaneity that she missed. She confessed that with the case dominating her world and Ethan growing more independent, her life had settled into a predictable, lonely rhythm. There was a raw edge to her voice when she said it. It sounded like something she'd been holding back for years, an admission that everything wasn't fine, even though she'd won. I just listened. I didn't offer any brilliant advice or profound insights. I simply nodded and let her speak. And as I sat there, I noticed things. The way her eyes lit up when she spoke about a passion project she was considering. The genuine, unburdened sound of her laughter. She wasn't just my former client anymore. She was a woman with her own thoughts, her own desires, her own life waiting to be lived. "Thank you," she said as we finished eating, and I helped her clear the plates. She smiled at me, and for a split second, I saw something deeper in her gaze. "I'm so glad you came," she added. "It's been a long time since I had a real conversation with anyone." I didn't know what to say, so I just gave her a slight nod, but I knew we were both thinking the same thing. There was a current between us now, one we didn't have to name out loud. When it was time for me to leave, she gave me a brief hug at the door. It was simple, friendly, and warm, but her hand lingered on my back for a fraction of a second too long, and that tiny moment stayed with me. "Take care, Marcus," she whispered, her voice barely audible. My head was spinning as I walked back to my car. The evening had seemed so ordinary on the surface, yet it had unlocked something inside me. I couldn't put my finger on it. She hadn't done anything overtly improper, but the way she had looked at me, the way she had listened, it made me feel as if there was something real growing between us, a connection of a different sort. I had been to countless client meetings, but this was not the same. And I hated how much I thought about it in the days that followed. I tried to push it away, to convince myself that nothing had happened. A few days later, a colleague invited me to a fundraiser at the Art Institute. I figured a night out would help clear my head, but as soon as I walked into the crowded gallery, I saw her. Isabel was standing with a small group of people, a glass of champagne in her hand. She saw me, and a slow smile spread across her face as she gave a small wave. Without thinking, I waved back. Her smile was composed, but it held a warmth that wasn't there before. That unspoken something made my stomach do a slow flip. "Marcus," she said as I approached. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight." I shrugged, trying to project a casual air. "Just supporting a good cause. I didn't know you'd be here either." She laughed lightly. "Yes, I'm on the benefit committee. It's been a while since I've had a night out like this." Her eyes held mine for a beat longer than necessary, and just like that, the tension was back. That subtle undercurrent that seemed to hum between us, always there, just below the surface. I should have made my excuses, said good evening, and mingled with other people, but I didn't. Instead, I stayed right there next to her. We talked, we laughed, and we pretended there was nothing unusual about the situation. Eventually, her friends drifted away, and we were left standing together, the buzz of the event swirling around us. We talked about art, about our respective careers, about the city. Even with the chatter all around, my focus kept narrowing to just her, and every time Isabel looked my way, I felt it. That shift, that pull that her smile or a glance elicited in me, something I didn't fully understand. It felt like we were sharing a secret that neither of us had yet dared to speak. Then, at one point, in a lull in the conversation, the words just came out. "So, Isabel, how have you really been?" She paused. Her polite smile faded slightly, and for a moment I saw something unguarded and raw in her eyes. "I'm okay," she said, her voice quiet. "I've been feeling a little lonely lately." Her honesty caught me off guard. It was as if she'd peeled back another layer, revealing a person I hadn't expected, someone who was not just a successful plaintiff or a society hostess. "Yeah," I found myself replying, nodding slowly. "I get that. It's not always easy." She gave a small nod in return, and we stood in a comfortable silence for a few moments. It wasn't awkward. It was strangely peaceful. I wanted to say more, to offer some comfort or lighten the weight she was clearly carrying, but the words wouldn't come. So I just looked at her, wondering if she was simply stating a fact, or if she was hinting at something more. Her friends returned, and the moment was broken. But something inside me had shifted. That night, my perception of Isabel was irrevocably altered. She was no longer just a past professional obligation. There was a different kind of light around her now, a compelling, almost dangerous kind. Later, when the event wound down, I saw her leaving, but my thoughts were stuck on that brief, honest exchange. What did she really mean by lonely? Was she just making an observation, or was she quietly asking for something more? As soon as I got home, I sank onto my couch and replayed the entire night in my head. That dinner, her confession tonight. It was then I realized this wasn't just a series of random encounters. There was something else developing between us, something unspoken and powerful, and whether I wanted to admit it or not, I was being drawn into it. The scariest part. I wasn't sure I wanted to resist anymore. The next few days felt heavy. I couldn't stop thinking about the fundraiser and Isabel's quiet admission. Her gaze had lingered on mine, as if she were searching for something. There was a weight in the air between us I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried. I kept telling myself it meant nothing, that it was just a fleeting post-case connection. But I knew better. My work had always been my focus. I was disciplined, driven. But lately, even when I was in a deposition or drafting a brief, I felt my thoughts drifting. Back to her. Back to Isabel. I hated that about myself. I hated the thoughts that refused to leave. The way she smiled. The way she carried herself. She felt different to me now. That Saturday I decided I needed to clear my head. I went for a long run along the lakefront, hoping the physical exertion would quiet my mind. Maybe if I pushed my body, I could outrun my thoughts. When I got back to my apartment, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number, but I recognized the downtown area code. It was her. The message was simple. "Are you free? There's a loose end from the settlement I need to ask about." My heart hammered. It was a legitimate reason, a perfect excuse, but it felt like more. I texted back that I could stop by. My gut, however, remained twisted the entire drive over, as if I were knowingly walking towards something I couldn't control. I walked through her building's lobby, and the doorman nodded at me with a familiar air that made me vaguely uncomfortable. I entered her apartment, and there she was. Isabel was sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine. She looked up when I came in, her smile practiced, as if everything were normal. "Hello, Marcus," she said politely, but I could see it. A weariness in her eyes, a slight tension in her posture. I knew she was playing a role. "Hey, Ethan," I said, nodding to her son, who was sitting in an armchair, scrolling on his phone. "How are you?" "I'm good," he mumbled, barely looking up. Isabel's smile tightened. "Ethan, don't be rude." She glanced at me. "It's been one of those long weeks." I could tell she was brushing something off, minimizing it. I didn't press her on it, mostly because I had no idea how. My heart was beating louder than I wanted to admit, so I followed her to the kitchen. I needed a moment to breathe, to escape the weight that was hanging in the living room. But as I reached for the glass of water she offered, I heard the soft click of the kitchen door closing behind me. Isabel was standing there, her arms crossed over her chest. "Marcus," she began, her voice quiet but direct. "Can we talk for a minute?" I turned, caught off guard. Yeah, of course. What's up?" She stepped closer, closing the distance between us. I felt my chest tighten as she approached. I wanted to thank you for the other night," she said, her eyes not quite meeting mine. "For listening. It meant a lot to me." I swallowed hard, her words landing with more force than I expected. "Of course," I managed. "You know I'm here if you ever need someone to talk to." She nodded slowly, and for a moment neither of us spoke. We were suspended in a thick, heavy silence that buzzed with everything we weren't saying. Then, almost as if to change the subject, she said, "Ethan's a good kid. You know, he's been through a lot, but he has such a good heart." I nodded again, unsure where this was going, but her gaze stayed on me an extra second. That same spark I'd felt before was back. It hummed between us like an over-tightened wire. "Yeah," I said softly. "He really does." She smiled, but there was something else in that smile, something I couldn't quite decipher. I wondered if she was thinking what I was thinking, and for a split second I considered just asking her. I almost asked what was happening here, between us. But I didn't. I just stood there, trapped in the silence with her, wondering where we were supposed to go from here. Finally, she broke the moment with a quiet, "Thank you again, Marcus." "Anytime," I replied, but a part of me knew I wasn't saying it in the same way anymore. A week passed after that conversation in the kitchen. It wasn't dramatic or loud, but it lingered with me. Every time I thought of Isabel after that, the air felt different, charged. I couldn't tell if she felt it too, or if I was just projecting my own feelings onto our interactions. Regardless, the dynamic between us had shifted, and I couldn't ignore it. My work continued as usual. I took on new cases, met with new clients, and tried to keep my focus sharp, but it didn't help. Every time Isabel's name came up in a final administrative email, my attention snagged. I'd noticed the small details in our brief professional exchanges, reading into a turn of phrase, searching for a hint of the woman from the kitchen, from the fundraiser. It was subtle, almost invisible, but I felt it. Then came Saturday. Ethan was out of town for the weekend visiting friends from college, a fact she'd mentioned in a casual email about a final tax form. The house would be empty. The thought settled in my mind and refused to leave. I needed space to process what was happening in my head and in my gut. I was sitting on my couch trying to read a book when my phone buzzed. It was her. The message read, "I know we've said our professional goodbyes, but I was hoping we could talk." That simple request made my stomach clench. "Yes, of course," I typed back, my fingers moving before my brain could object. She invited me over. When I arrived, she was waiting. We sat on the same couch where we'd first talked after the case ended. We weren't touching, but the space between us felt infinitesimally small. The air felt heavier. The room felt smaller. "I've been thinking about our conversations lately," she began, her voice soft and careful, "and I feel like I owe you an apology." I looked at her, completely blindsided. This was not where I expected this to go. "I know I've been a bit forward," she explained. She said she'd been dealing with a lot of changes and didn't mean to put me in an uncomfortable position. I blinked, trying to read her expression. "It's fine," I finally said. "You don't have to apologize." She offered a warm smile at that, but something in her eyes told me she wasn't entirely convinced. There was more she wasn't saying. "I appreciate that," she replied, "but I think I may have crossed a boundary with you." My heart skipped a beat. This was the moment I had been dreading, and, if I was being honest with myself, quietly anticipating. I had no idea where it would lead, but I couldn't stop myself from hearing her out. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice softer now, more cautious. Isabel took a deep breath and looked down at her hands, which were twisting in her lap. "I think you know," she said gently. "There's been something between us, and I can't keep pretending it doesn't exist." I froze. Her words hit me squarely in the chest, harder than I'd anticipated. Of course I had felt it, but hearing her say it aloud made it real, tangible, and terrifyingly complicated. "I'm not trying to make things awkward, Marcus," she continued, her voice just above a whisper. I'm not sure how to handle this, but I can't keep pretending nothing is happening." I looked at her, my mind racing in a dozen different directions. Every professional instinct I had was screaming that this was wrong, that I should not be here. And yet, there I was. "I don't want it to be weird either," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to keep the entire situation from spiraling. "But I don't know what you want me to say." Her gaze met mine, direct and unwavering. We sat in silence for a long moment. The quiet was dense, heavy with everything we couldn't articulate. Then she reached out. Her hand brushed against mine, a touch so light it was barely there, but it sent an electric jolt through me. My breath hitched, and for a few seconds I couldn't move. "This isn't just about gratitude, Marcus," she whispered, her eyes locked on mine. "I'm not sure what this is, but I can't ignore it anymore, and I don't want to." A torrent of emotions washed over me all at once: guilt, curiosity, desire, fear. I knew the risks. I knew what could happen if anyone ever found out, the professional fallout. But I also knew this connection was real. And a part of me, a very large part, didn't want it to stop. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I mean, about whatever this is." She nodded, her fingers curling around mine, a firm, decisive grasp. "I'm sure." And with that, the line we had been so carefully dancing around vanished. We didn't say anything else. There was nothing left to say. The air had changed. We had both felt the shift, the immense weight of what we had just acknowledged. Everything was different after that. It's been 1 year since that night, a year of keeping a secret, a year of balancing our public lives with the quiet, private world we built for ourselves. In some ways, it feels like we've lived an entire lifetime in those stolen moments. We didn't talk much about the use of it all. What began that night on her couch hadn't faded. It had simply woven itself into the fabric of our lives. It felt strangely natural, but it was also fragile, something we held close and protected fiercely. We agreed on one thing from the start. Our happiness mattered. And that happiness was built on a foundation of trust, the kind of trust that allowed us to share everything with each other while keeping it hidden from the rest of the world. We created our own space, our own small universe where the rules of the outside world didn't apply. The guilt never fully disappeared for me. Every time I saw a colleague who knew I'd represented her, a small pang of anxiety hit my gut. Not because I thought they'd know, but because carrying a secret of this magnitude always leaves a mark. Still, I never once second-guessed the decision we made. We both made it. And no matter how complicated or messy things got, being with her always felt right. Isabel and I saw each other whenever we could, which wasn't often. We never pushed the boundaries. We kept everything discreet, quiet, and out of sight. The hardest part was the pretense. If we ran into each other at a function, we'd exchange polite greetings, our hands never touching, acting as if we were nothing more than a lawyer and his grateful former client. But those little moments, the quick, shared glance across a room, the subtle smile only meant for me, the fleeting brush of hands when no one was looking, they became our language. They were what held us together. When we were alone in her condo, we would sometimes talk about what might happen if the truth ever came out. We never had a concrete plan, just vague possibilities and half-formed ideas. But we didn't dwell on it for long. We stayed in the present, in the quiet, in-between spaces where we didn't have to justify ourselves to anyone, where we could just be. It was a quiet Saturday evening, almost exactly a year after our relationship began. I was at Isabel's, sitting on the couch, the very same spot where it all started. The condo was peaceful. Ethan was away at school, so we had the place to ourselves again. Everything felt normal now, comfortable in a way that had once been so foreign. We had learned how to live like this, in the quiet, careful and connected space we'd carved out. We didn't need to constantly talk about our feelings anymore. The relationship had settled into something steady, something real. It was unconventional always, but it had become something I couldn't imagine giving up. Isabel sat beside me, looking as elegant as ever. But there was a softness to her now, an ease in her posture and a peace in her expression that hadn't been there a year ago. It had taken time, but we had learned to carry the weight of what we had. We had grown into our secret. I had found a strange peace in it. I had learned how to make it feel like home. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" she asked softly, her voice a warm, low murmur that broke the comfortable silence. I smiled and leaned back, sinking deeper into the cushions. "All the time," I admitted. "Honestly, I still can't believe we've made it this long without anyone finding out." I looked over at her, the old sense of disbelief now transformed into something that felt a lot like gratitude. She let out a quiet laugh and rested her head on my shoulder. "It doesn't feel like a year, does it?" she murmured. "But at the same time, it feels like this has always been us, like this was always supposed to happen." I nodded slowly, my hand finding hers. "Yeah, it's weird," I said. "But it's our kind of weird. I never thought my life would look like this, but now that I'm here, I wouldn't change a thing." She tilted her head up, meeting my gaze with that same look that always seemed to make the world stand still. She replied gently, "Me neither. Considering the circumstances, I think we've done pretty well. I'm glad we kept it just between us." Her voice was firm, certain. "It's ours. It's just ours." And she was right. That was the most important part. It wasn't about anyone else. This was something we had built quietly, carefully together. "I'm happy," I said softly, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "We're happy, that's what matters." We didn't talk much after that. We didn't have to. We just sat there, side by side, wrapped in a silence that didn't need filling. The only sound was the distant city hum and the quiet ticking of the clock on the wall. A year had passed, a whole year of hiding in plain sight. We had somehow made it work. We kept the secret. We protected what we had. And through it all, we held on to the one thing that mattered most: each other. As the evening deepened and the skyline outside began to glitter, one thought settled in my mind with absolute clarity. This was how I wanted things to stay. It wasn't perfect. It was messy and strange and complicated, but it was ours.